Every day, every shift in the ER is the day of the unknown. Some days are quiet and other days are complete professional chaos. Lives are saved and lives are lost. Death visits frequently. What is it really like to walk in the shoes of an ER physician for a day in the emergency room? And how does a physician really deal with life and death decisions on a daily basis? For the past 16 years, Dr. Tim Meyers has walked through the emergency room doors not knowing what his day will hold. Will he face the death of a stranger's loved one who can't be saved? Or will it be a day that he saves many lives? And how does his unshakable faith help him make his decisions and deal with the ups and downs of saving lives? This is today's life, a story of unshakable faith. Dr. Meyers, it is so good to see you again. It's been a long time. I used to work in the ER here with you.
It has been. It just doesn't seem like it's been that long. But
5 years.
Flies. Yeah.
It's a crazy place. I don't miss it at all.
Really?
No, I don't. Hey, listen, tell me about what it's like for you as a doctor in the ER and walk me through one of your chaotic days. I know what it's like for a nurse. You know, we're juggling around patients and making sure they're going to all their tests and taking care of them. But I really want to know, what is it like for a doctor? Because you have so many more decisions than, you know, nurses have to make. Tell me what it's like. Just walk me through one day and a crazy day in the ER.
Well, I suppose that is a big part of why I like emergency medicine and working in an emergency department, is that no day is the same and that it is crazy. And you sort of have to like that and enjoy that to do this over a long period of time. And so I like that fact that every day is different and is even, as you said, chaotic. So I like the fact that there's so much diversity in the emergency department, that sometimes you're focused on medical problems and kind of solving the mystery of why is a patient having a symptom. And sometimes that's a 1-month-old and trying to figure out why they have a fever. And in the room right next door, it may be an 80-year-old, and you're trying to figure out why they're having chest pain, and if it's an emergent cause of chest pain. And then if it is, what we need to do to treat it and to make them better. And then there's a whole other group of patients where it's not so much of a mystery as to what's going on, but it's something that just needs to be fixed, and it's procedural, and you get to use your hands. And so that might be a laceration to sew up, or it may be somebody that's dislocated a shoulder and we need to put them to sleep and put their shoulder back into the joint. And so I love that aspect about it, that every day and every situation and really every patient is different. But it can be crazy and it can be chaotic too. And so sometimes I'll see a patient and I know what I'm wanting to do on them, but by the time I get back to my desk, I may have been asked by a nurse for pain medicines for another patient, and the secretary will let me know that I've got a call coming in from another doctor, and then there'll be a paramedic on the phone that's wanting orders as they're coming in with a patient. And then you sort of have to sit and gather yourself and say, what was it that I was coming back to the computer here to do or to order on this patient? And so you have to get used to that and that pace, and that it is somewhat frantic. So, but I've enjoyed that over time, and I think that part of what makes that also enjoyable is that in the emergency department, it's a little bit unique or different than other jobs in some respects, because you're just very much a part of a team. And so even though I do have my individual responsibilities and you have your individual responsibilities as a nurse, we just really have to come together to each do our thing and to do it well, so that in the end the cumulative thing is done right. And so there's respiratory therapists and there's paramedics bringing patients in, and the clerks have an important job making phone calls, and so everybody, it's sort of chaotic for each individual group, but you sort of do your thing. So.
Well, I have to ask you about your lapel. You have a cross on your lapel. Tell me about it. And tell me about the hospital. You know, I loved working here because it is a faith-based ministry. But I want to hear about the story. You've worn that cross for years.
I have worn it for years. I would say that it's probably 9 or 10 years now that I've worn it, and a patient gave it to me. I had actually sewn up his hand, and he came back to get the sutures out a week or so later, and he had made it. He had hand carved these, and he had done different carvings like that. And so he wanted me to have it, and I thought, you know, because we had talked about our faith that day while he was there, or just while we were sewing him up. You always have some downtime, so it's interesting all the different conversations that you get into. So I felt like that it was neat that came out of that, and so he brought it up, and I thought, if I wear it and people ask about it, you know, it may
opens the door.
Generate future discussions. So, and it is nice, you're right, to work in a place where you can have those discussions and feel free to do so. That we really do, as a hospital, try to emphasize that this is a ministry. It's a ministry to patients. And that's how we really refer to these different things and the different aspects that we do, that it is the ministry of this. And so working at an institution that is faith-based really is very freeing.
Well, you know, the pressures always used to get to me. I'd go home and take it with me, and I always wondered, do you take anything home with you? Do the pressures, how do you handle it?
Well, I think that I try to deal with the pressures of the pressures that come through work, like I do with sort of everything else in life. And I think it's really with an emphasis in just trusting in the Lord first, and trusting in His sovereignty and that He's in control. And that kind of gives you ultimate peace and ultimate trust. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 says, "Trust in the Lord with all of your heart, and lean not on your own understanding, but in all ways acknowledge Him, and He will make your paths straight." And you know, that's sometimes easier said than done, but as you get used to that over time, I mean, it really helps me resist that temptation to lean on my own understanding, figure things out on my own, but to really have a bigger, long-term, eternal perspective, and that He's in control. And that helps a lot. And some of it is just how I'm wired up. I do think it's helpful. I think He put me in this field for a reason, because I do feel like I'm able to shut off. I can turn off the switch, and when I go home with family, be with family, and not, sometimes my wife even jokes when she asks me about how my day was, and I say I'm not sure I remember, and there's some truth to that, and that's a blessing. So.
Dr. Meyers, your faith is so important to you. I saw it for years, the way you treated patients and family. Tell me why it is important to you.
Well, I think I try to see everything that I do through that lens of faith, of really just having an understanding of why I'm here. And to me, that ultimately comes down to sort of an understanding of my relationship to my Creator and to my God. And so I think probably Romans 12:1 kind of helps summarize it to some degree. Paul says, "Therefore I urge you, brothers, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God, for this is your spiritual act of worship." And so I think that sums it up in a lot of ways for me, because He created me, He loves me, He gave me through grace salvation through sending His Son to die on the cross. And so He's done all of that for me. It's very freeing. And so what all I can do in return is to live a life that is glorifying to Him, and to through what I do, offer that up as a sacrifice to Him. And so I think that that eases a lot of burden that I may have, because I'm just trying to serve Him and do the best with what He's given me. But it also gives me purpose, and so my faith really is largely what drives me.
Do you share your faith with your patients every day, or does it come up in conversation, or do you pursue it, or do they?
Right. Yeah. Sometimes you're just trying to demonstrate your faith by your interaction and the way, and to some degree, I think since we're at a faith-based hospital, you are representing God in that way just by what you're doing and your actions. And then I think though that does lead to conversations though, and a lot of times, specifically, if I'm letting somebody know about something where I can tell they're just having trouble with perspective. So some people will come in here and just primarily where their primary problem is anxiety. Some people will come in here having real physical complaints, but it's stemming out of that. Or sometimes people have a real medical problem, physical problem, but when I am telling them that, it's a lot to handle, it's hard to handle. And so in all of those different circumstances, an opportunity to share faith comes up. So usually I'll just sort of feel it out and see how the conversation's going, if that's something that they want or want to talk about or incorporate, and then try to really, if the door is open there, to go ahead, but not in a way that I'm sort of forcing that onto people, right, or where it's uncomfortable. So some days it comes up and I'm thankful for it, and some days it doesn't. So.
Well, I want to ask you this. Death visits the ER often. We both have been in situations, code situations. Sometimes we save lives, sometimes we don't. It's a very difficult time when we lose a patient. So how does it affect you, and how do you deal with it? And families are involved. It's I've been in situations where you have to go and talk to the family. So how do you deal with that?
Well, I think that there's two parts to that. There's that, how do I deal with it personally, and then how do I deal with that sort of in interacting with the family. And that is really hard, because everybody is coming into that situation from a different perspective. And some of them, and frankly, I'm surprised at how often I'm talking with a family, or we're dealing with a bad situation, or somebody like you said who's died, and it becomes clear that that they have never really considered faith, or their faith, or what they put their faith in, or what's going to happen to you when you do die, so for a lot of people, this is the first thing that's happened that has forced them to think about that, or to question that. And so through the conversation and letting them know and giving them what is bad news, you start to get a sense for that and where they're coming from. And then I try to just take it from there. Sometimes as a way to share my faith or share my perspective, or if they're needing help in that moment, kind of dealing with suffering, and trying to help give them some perspective there. But that's tricky, because you want to do it in a way that's sort of not condemning, but is helpful, or maybe gives them something to chew on for later, or to plant a seed. But it's interesting, often in those moments, the way that I really will do it is, instead of kind of giving them advice or trying to answer, I will just offer to pray with them, and say, would you like me just to say a prayer here? And a lot of times if they're critically ill, I'll pray for the doctors and the nurses and for wisdom and for focus, and then pray for the family for just encouragement in this time, and pray for healing, obviously, for the patient, and for somebody who's died, just praying for them and what life is going to be like now without their loved one, and to give them strength and encouragement and things like that. But it's interesting because I know that people are coming from all different backgrounds, or from a lot of times no faith background, but I've never in 16 years or so ever had anybody turn me down or say that they don't want prayer in that moment. And again, depending on, it can be a very different prayer depending on the situation. But so I've found that interesting.
What about, do you ever get angry?
Sure. I would probably like to think of it more as frustration. A sort of controlled anger. But yeah, sometimes we are seeing folks at some of their worst moments, and so I try to keep that in perspective. That they may be behaving in a way that's different than how they normally would, and I think sometimes with some of the patients that we see in here. We will try to remind myself that, but by God's grace, that could be me, and I think sometimes that helps temper that. But yes, when patients abuse the EMS system as a way to be able to get here to the hospital, or they're here wanting something else other than just medical care, but there's some other secondary gain. Those are frustrating situations, and you just have to find ways to kind of temper that.
Dr. Meyers, when did you know you wanted to be a doctor, and why did you make that decision?
I know that I started becoming interested in it even really as early as middle school, because my dad actually is a doctor, but he did not start medical school until I was 5 years old. So he was definitely older in life, going back to medical school with a lot of students that were just coming straight out of college, and I think at that time he had probably been out of college for more than 9 years or so. So from the time that I was 5 until 9, he was in medical school, and then he trained for 6 more years before he was sort of done with his training. So from the time that I was 9 until 13, he was in his residency training in internal medicine, and then he did an additional 3 or 4 years in specialty training in cardiology, which is a subdivision of internal medicine, as you know. And so really, I got to see him walking through that process, and the excitement of both learning but also sort of developing what he did. And so I would go with him sometimes up to the hospital, and so the hospital environment just always excited me. And then as I got older, I just loved biology and knowing how things worked for living things, how they worked. That always interested me more than mechanical things. But all the way down to just the cellular level, it just fascinated me. But it wasn't just that. I found through doing research and things in college that I didn't want to just be at that science level, but I also really just enjoyed people and enjoyed helping people. And so it really became this great balance between just being fascinated with the biology and the physiology, but also being able to just have people and patient interaction. And so I would say that it was about halfway through college that I decided for sure that that's what I wanted to do. And then you have to kind of redirect your coursework and things to get you going in that direction.
Now, you've been a doctor for how many years now? 16, 17?
Yes, for 16 years I've been.
So medicine's changed over the years. Would you do it all over again?
Yeah, I would for sure. For me, the thing, every field is going to change. So I guess from that standpoint, when you're talking about careers that you're interested in, you want something that's not going to change so much as to where it becomes obsolete. And so I think that there will always be healthcare issues, so it's stable from that standpoint. But the other things that change, are things that really tend to change in any job. And so as long as you're doing it for the right reasons, I think those things don't really change. And so,
do you feel like God has called you into this field?
Yeah, I feel very much that way, and that's always what I hoped early on. And would pray for direction in that, open and closed doors, and that. Being able to go into a field that would be fulfilling, and that I would be able to use the gifts and the talents that He had gave me for His purpose, and medicine is a great way to be able to do that for sure.
So, what message would you have for a person who is coming into the ER? What would you want every person to know?
I would say that. Well, obviously you want people to feel like they're being well taken care of, and that we are here to help them, that I really feel like the nurses, even my partners, we really try to take care of people like they're our own family. That we want to be very thoughtful about what's going on, but also that we want to do the right thing for them, and to trust in that. Sometimes people come in and they just want an antibiotic, and sometimes it's hard you want them to just trust that you've looked over everything, and that you think that this is a virus, and that an antibiotic may not be the actual right thing for them. And but we're making that decision just like we would if it was our family member. And so I think I would want people to know that, and I would probably, going back to one of our earlier questions, I would probably encourage people to not have the ER be the place, or when a tragedy comes up in your life, for that to be the time where you are first considering your faith, or what you put your faith in, or what this is all about, or what happens after I die, and not have that be the first time that you're considering that in the ER or in that kind of situation. And I would encourage people in that way to consider that now, and to look into those things and ask those questions of people that they trust.
What is your scripture? What's your favorite Bible verse?
I have always loved the verse Micah 6:8, and it's been put, just like a lot of verses have been put to music, but in Micah 6:8, he says, He has shown thee, O man, what is good and what the Lord requires of you, but to do justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. And I just feel like that's just an incredible charge, and I've just always really enjoyed that verse.
When you walk into the ER every day, do you say a prayer coming in when you walk through those doors? I remember every day I used to, because the ER is a place of unknown, and you never know what your day is going to be like. Do you have a morning routine where you come in and spend time, or?
Well, I would admit that it's hard because we don't have any real routine here. For you, it was nice because you had a shift that you could be the day nurse, and you would always start in the morning. We have different shifts, different times of the day. So even sometimes I do have to really keep perspective on why I'm doing this, and sometimes my prayer will be different. Sometimes it's just to get the right perspective, because I work the night shift tonight, and I'll be driving in when everybody else is going home to get into bed, and it's at 9:30 at night, and you might be tempted to feel a little sorry for yourself that you hit the bright lights, and so I think really it's just going back to that first question of just trusting in the Lord.
Dr. Meyers, thank you so much for sharing your faith today.
No problem. It was good to be here. It was good to see you again.
Good to see you too. You know, we have an amazing God, and He loves you so much. You know, He is the one who knows you best and loves you most. So if you're facing a health crisis or you're struggling with a health problem, keep your eyes focused on Him. He tells us to live by faith, not by sight, so that you too someday can share your story of unshakable faith with others. Join us next time.
Cornerstone Television wishes to thank all our faithful viewers whose consistent prayers and financial support have made this program possible.